Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty amazing, the potential for an HIV cure. We've got some excerpts here from American Gene Technologies, and they have this page called HIV Cure Countdown. It's really fascinating stuff. We're going to be focusing on AGT's approach and their timeline, and hopefully by the end of this you'll have a really clear picture of just how far we've come in this exciting race for a cure. There's definitely a lot of excitement surrounding this research. HIV research is a constantly evolving field, but AGT's work with gene and cell therapy is generating a lot of buzz.
Yeah, I've been reading about their therapy, AGT 103-CAN-T, and it seems like they've already hit some pretty major milestones in their clinical trial.
Oh, they absolutely have. If you look at their timeline, you can see that they got FDA approval back in August of 2020.
Wow, 2020, that seems so recent.
It really does. And within just a few months, they'd already enrolled their first participant. And by May 2021, the first patient had already received the AGT 103D infusion.
That's a really fast turnaround. So what happened next?
Well, just 7 months later, in December 2021, they started seeing what they call blood markers of efficacy, which is a really big deal, especially for a phase 1A trial.
Okay, so I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with the ins and outs of clinical trials. Can you explain what's so significant about seeing those markers in phase 1A?
Sure. So phase 1A trials are primarily focused on safety. Researchers are looking to see if a new therapy is safe for humans and what side effects it might have. They don't usually expect to see signs that the treatment is actually working at this early stage.
So they're not even really looking for effectiveness yet at that point.
Exactly. Efficacy usually comes later in phase 2. But in this case, they got a sneak peek a little earlier than expected.
So what did that mean for the trial when they saw those markers?
Well, it definitely created a wave of excitement and optimism. It suggested that the therapy might actually be doing something really incredible. And then by July 2022, they were confident enough in the results to begin taking some participants off their antiretroviral drugs.
Wait, really? They felt comfortable enough to take people off the very medication that's been keeping the virus in check? That's a pretty bold move.
It is, and it speaks to the potential they were seeing.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that this doesn't mean everyone was cured immediately.
Right, of course. So what happened to those participants who went off their medication?
In August of 2023, they started a new study called an Analytical Treatment Interruption. And this is a critical step to see how well the therapy is working long-term.
Okay, so break that down for me. What exactly is an analytical treatment interruption?
So essentially, they're carefully taking participants off their antiretroviral therapy and closely monitoring how their immune systems respond to the virus without the medication.
So it's like a real test to see if the therapy has actually trained the immune system to fight the virus on its own.
Precisely. They're asking, can your own immune system, now potentially bolstered by the therapy, keep the virus in check?
That makes a lot of sense. So is there anything else about the phase 1A trial that really stood out to you?
Well, they wrapped up the entire phase 1A trial in November 2022 with no serious adverse events. And that, in the world of gene therapy research, is truly remarkable.
No serious side effects. That's amazing. Why is that so noteworthy?
Well, gene therapy is still a relatively new field, and there have been some high-profile cases of serious side effects in other trials. So the fact that AGT made it through phase 1A with a clean safety record is a huge deal.
Yeah.
It signals to the scientific community and to regulatory agencies that this therapy has the potential to be both safe and effective. It really sets them apart.
Okay, so reading through this timeline, two things really jumped out at me. The first is that they actually sped up the trial after just the first 3 participants showed no adverse effects.
Right. Yes, you're right. The Data Safety Monitoring Board, or DSMB, recommended accelerating the trial.
And remind me again, what exactly is the DSMB?
The DSMB, they're like the independent referees of the clinical trial world. They're there to make sure everything is being done safely and ethically.
Right, right. So for them to say, let's speed things up after only 3 participants, that's got to be a major sign of confidence in the therapy's safety.
Oh, absolutely. It means they were seeing such positive safety data, even in that small initial group, that they felt comfortable moving the trial forward at a faster pace.
Interesting. The other thing that really struck me was how early they started seeing those blood markers of efficacy. It's like they stumbled upon a hidden treasure way ahead of schedule. Is that common in HIV cure research?
Not at all. Seeing those markers in phase 1A is rare. It suggests that AGT 103T might actually be modifying the immune system in a way that allows it to control the virus. It's still early days, but it's definitely a reason for cautious optimism.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, this therapy really does live up to its potential and becomes a functional cure for HIV. What would that actually look like? What would it mean for people living with HIV on a day-to-day basis?
Well, imagine a life free from daily medication and the constant fear of transmission. Think of the burden that would be lifted. No more pill organizers, no more worrying about side effects or drug interactions. A cure would fundamentally change how people living with HIV experience their lives.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that kind of freedom. The freedom from having to manage a chronic illness every single day. And what about the broader impact? What could a cure mean for society as a whole?
On a societal level, we could see a significant reduction in transmission rates, and we could finally start to dismantle the stigma that has surrounded HIV for decades. It would truly be a game changer.
It really would. It's incredible to think about the ripple effects a cure could have, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. All right, let's get back to AGT and their HIV cure countdown. It sounds like they've got some ambitious plans for the future.
They do. Next on their agenda is completing phase 2 of the clinical trial, which they hope to get approved soon.
And phase 2 is all about confirming what they saw in phase 1A, right? Making sure the efficacy holds up in a larger and more diverse group of people.
Exactly. Phase 2 will involve a much larger participant group, which will allow researchers to gather more robust data on the treatment's effectiveness and safety. They'll be watching closely for any long-term side effects and how long the positive effects of the therapy actually last. It's a critical step in the journey towards FDA approval.
So let's say phase 2 goes as well as they're hoping. What happens next?
Well, things could get really interesting. Because gene and cell therapies are so cutting edge, they often qualify for what's called a limited license, even before completing all 3 phases of clinical trials.
A limited license? I've never heard of that. What does that mean?
It means the therapy could become available to certain patients, perhaps those with very limited treatment options before it's fully approved and available to the general public. It's a way to get potentially life-saving treatment to those who need it most, while the company continues gathering data for full approval.
Wow. So there's a chance people could start benefiting from this therapy even sooner than we thought. But to offer the therapy commercially to everyone, they still need that final hurdle, the Biologics License Agreement, or BLA, right?
That's right. The BLA is the ultimate goal. It's what gives them the green light to offer the therapy to anyone who needs it. But to get there, they have to present the FDA with a mountain of evidence demonstrating the therapy's long-term safety and efficacy. It's a rigorous process, but if they can clear this final hurdle, it would truly be a monumental achievement.
Okay, so while we're all understandably excited about the possibility of an HIV cure, it's important to stay grounded here. It's not a done deal, right? What could potentially stand in their way?
Well, there are always unexpected challenges that can arise in clinical trials. Sometimes a therapy that shows promise in early stages doesn't perform as well in larger studies. And even if the therapy continues to show positive results, there are huge logistical and financial hurdles to overcome in terms of manufacturing and distribution. Gene and cell therapies are incredibly complex to produce on a large scale, and the costs can be significant.
So it's not just about developing a cure, it's about making it accessible and affordable to everyone who needs it.
Precisely. It's a multifaceted challenge. But the potential rewards are so significant that it's absolutely worth pursuing.
Well said. It's been incredible to dive into the science behind AGT's research, but I think it's time to zoom out a bit and explore the bigger picture. What would a world without HIV actually look like? What could this mean for humanity as a whole?
That's a question worth pondering. It allows us to truly grasp the transformative potential of this research. And I think it's a conversation best continued after a short break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were starting to imagine what a world without HIV might look like. It's a really profound question, and one that touches on so many different aspects of our lives.
It does. We've talked about the science and the clinical trials, but I'd love to hear more about the potential impact of an HIV cure on a more personal level. Like, what could this mean for people living with HIV day to day? Well, for someone living with HIV, a cure would represent a really profound shift in how they live their lives. I mean, think about the freedom that comes with not having to manage a chronic illness every single day.
Right.
No more daily medications, no more worrying about side effects, and perhaps most importantly, no more fear of transmitting the virus to others.
It's like they could finally exhale after holding their breath for so long. I imagine the psychological impact would be immense.
Absolutely. The emotional burden of living with HIV can be incredibly heavy. There's the fear of disclosure, the worry about how others will perceive you, and the internalized stigma that society has unfortunately often imposed. A cure could help alleviate those anxieties, allowing individuals to really live their lives more fully and openly.
We hear the word stigma thrown around a lot, but it's easy to forget how deeply it can impact people's lives.
It's true. Stigma can manifest in so many ways, from subtle discrimination to outright rejection. It can affect people's relationships, their job prospects, their mental health, their overall well-being. A cure wouldn't magically erase stigma overnight, but it could be a really powerful step towards creating a more accepting and supportive environment for people living with HIV.
It's like we'd be chipping away at this invisible wall that has separated people living with HIV from the rest of society for far too long.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the potential impact on a larger scale. From a public health perspective, a cure would be a game changer. We could see a dramatic reduction in new HIV infections, which would free up significant resources that are currently dedicated to managing the epidemic.
That makes sense. If fewer people are getting infected, there's less need for testing, treatment, and prevention programs. So those resources could be redirected towards other pressing health concerns, or even towards addressing the social and economic factors that contribute to HIV vulnerability in the first place.
You're absolutely right. We can't forget that a cure alone won't solve the complex social and economic inequalities that fuel the epidemic. Things like poverty, lack of access to healthcare, and discrimination based on race, gender identity, or sexual orientation all play a role. A cure would need to be accompanied by a continued commitment to addressing these systemic issues.
So it's about creating a more equitable and just world where everyone has a fair shot at health and well-being, regardless of their background or their HIV status.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that HIV is a global issue. A cure wouldn't just transform lives here in the United States, it would have a ripple effect throughout the world.
It's a reminder that scientific advancements have the power to transcend borders and create positive change on a global scale.
They really do. And sometimes I think it's helpful to step back from the scientific details and just imagine what that change might look like. What would the world be like if we no longer had to live under the shadow of HIV?
That's a powerful question. It invites us to think about the transformative potential of this research and what a future without HIV could mean for humanity as a whole. But as we're having this conversation, it's important to acknowledge that we're not quite there yet.
Right. Even if AGT's therapy continues to show promise, there are still significant challenges ahead.
Like what are some of the obstacles that could stand in the way of achieving this vision of a world without HIV?
Well, as we talked about earlier, manufacturing a gene and cell therapy on a large scale is incredibly complex and expensive. Ensuring equitable access to the treatment, even if it's proven safe and effective, will require a massive coordinated effort from governments, healthcare systems, and advocacy organizations.
Right. It's not enough to simply develop a cure. You have to make sure it reaches the people who need it most, regardless of where they live or their ability to pay. And then there's the issue of public perception. Even if a cure is available, will people trust it? Will they be willing to get treated?
That's a crucial point. Decades of misinformation and stigma have created a lot of distrust and fear surrounding HIV. We need to make sure people understand how the therapy works, that it's safe, and that it offers a real chance at a healthy future.
So it's about building trust and providing accurate information to empower people to make informed decisions about their health.
Exactly. And even if we overcome all of these challenges, there's another important consideration. What happens to the millions of people who are already living with HIV? A cure would be a transformative breakthrough for them, but it wouldn't erase the experiences they've lived through or the challenges they continue to face.
That's a really important point. There's a whole generation of people who have navigated the complexities of living with HIV for years, even decades. Their stories, their resilience, their activism, all of that needs to be acknowledged and honored.
Absolutely. The fight against HIV has been a long and difficult one, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the tireless efforts of advocates, researchers, and people living with HIV who've refused to give up hope. Their contributions deserve to be recognized and celebrated, even as we look towards a future where HIV is no longer a threat.
I think that's a really important perspective to keep in mind. So we've talked about the individual impact, the societal impact, the global implications, and the challenges that still lie ahead. What are your final thoughts on all of this? What would you say is the most important takeaway from this conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is that we're living in a time of unprecedented possibility when it comes to HIV. While we still have a long way to go, the progress we've made in research, treatment, and prevention is truly remarkable. And with continued investment, collaboration, and a commitment to social justice, I believe we can achieve a future where HIV is no longer a public health crisis, but a memory.
A future where HIV is a memory. That's a powerful vision. And we'll be right back after a quick break to delve into AGT's projected timeline for making that vision a reality. All right, so we're back, and we're ready to explore AGT's HIV cure countdown. It's basically their roadmap for the future of this whole therapy. And it's pretty ambitious stuff.
It really is. They've laid out a clear plan for moving forward. Starting with completing phase 2 of their clinical trial. They're hoping to get approval to start that phase very soon.
Right, and phase 2 is all about expanding the trial, right? Bringing in a much larger group of people to confirm what they observed in those earlier stages.
Exactly. They'll be closely monitoring how well the therapy works in different populations and watching for any potential long-term side effects. It's a really crucial step for gathering all the data they need.
And what's so interesting is that even before phase 3, there's a chance that this therapy could actually become available to some patients. We were talking earlier about the possibility of a limited license. What would that look like in real life?
Well, imagine someone living with HIV who hasn't responded well to those traditional antiretroviral therapies. They're facing a really difficult situation. A limited license could actually give them access to this potentially life-changing therapy even before it's commercially available to everyone. It's a way to offer hope and maybe even better outcomes to those who need it the most, all while the company continues gathering data for full approval.
That's pretty incredible. To think that people could actually start benefiting from this research even sooner than we thought. But I know the ultimate goal here is to get full FDA approval, right? What needs to happen for AGT to achieve that?
The final hurdle is obtaining a Biologics License Agreement, or BLA, from the FDA. This is the golden ticket that allows them to offer the therapy commercially to everyone. But to get there, they need to provide the FDA with mountains of evidence demonstrating the therapy's long-term safety and efficacy.
It's definitely a rigorous process. But if they can pull it off, it could completely revolutionize how we approach HIV. What do you think the world looks like 5, 10 years down the line if this therapy is widely available?
I think we'd see a huge shift in the way that society views HIV. Right now there's still so much fear and stigma. But with a potential cure, I think we could start to see that change.
You mean people wouldn't necessarily view an HIV diagnosis as a life sentence anymore?
Exactly. It would become more like any other manageable condition.
And I imagine with that shift in perception, we could see a big surge in testing and early treatment, leading to a dramatic decrease in new infections.
It's like a domino effect, one positive change leading to another.
So it's not just about treating those who are already living with HIV. It's about preventing the spread of the virus and creating a future where fewer people have to face this diagnosis.
Absolutely. And imagine all the resources that could be freed up.
Yeah.
If we no longer needed to pour so much funding into managing the epidemic, we could use those resources for other health concerns, improve access to health care, and address those social and economic inequalities that make certain populations more vulnerable in the first place.
It's a good reminder that scientific advancements don't just change individual lives, they can transform societies.
They really can. AGT's research gives us a glimpse of what that transformation might actually look like. A world where HIV is no longer this defining characteristic, but just a part of someone's medical history, like a broken bone or a childhood illness.
It's been absolutely fascinating to delve into the science and explore all the potential implications of this research. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
I think the biggest takeaway for everyone is that we're at a really pivotal moment in the fight against HIV. There are still some challenges ahead, but the progress we've made is truly remarkable. And with the continued dedication from researchers, advocates, and policymakers, I believe we can achieve a future where HIV is no longer a public health crisis, but just a distant memory.
A future where HIV is a distant memory. That's a powerful thought, and we'll certainly be following AGT's journey closely and keeping all of you updated on their progress. In the meantime, we encourage you to learn more about HIV. Talk to your healthcare providers and stay informed about the latest advancements in treatment and prevention.
Knowledge is power. The more we understand about this virus and the strides being made in research, the closer we'll get to that brighter future we've been discussing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.